After that, Salus spent a great deal of time talking over general plans with the entire group. He laid out a full strategy that, to everyone's surprise, sounded exceptionally plausible. It was like he thought everything out to the last detail, accounted for every possibility, every risk factor. Nothing was left to chance. They established a meeting place, somewhere that they would meet up with each other should they become separated. He explained the ward system that he was going to place up in order to protect them, and where the border lines were so they wouldn't cross it. Specifically, Rico and Taleon, who were the only two who possessed demonic energy that might be detected. If his mother or grandmother crossed over, it didn't really matter. But they weren't going to be close enough to have to do that. The border was going to be exceptionally large and encompass a large area. Both the field where they would be training, as well as their home, would both be heavily warded, so that no one would be able to detect them. Even the area that they would pass through in order to get from the training ground to the home was heavily warded. And neither Taleon nor Rico was to wander off during their travel between the two. They had to keep to a tight section in order to stay within the border. Any attempts to wander off would be quickly punished. Afterwards, he gave Vera a new shopping list, this time focusing on materials that they could get through humans, rather than ones that would be more common with demons. Those would be the most effective, yes, but they could still use materials that they got from magical human beings. They just wouldn't have the more rare materials to work with, things that are hard to find in the human world. If they did have them, they would be in sparse supply. But he instructed her to get them, even in small amounts if they did have them. He wasted no time at all beginning to set up the border. Immediately after they finished their conversation, he left to do so, and was gone for a great deal of time, probably about 4 hours. He instructed everybody to stay awake for the time being. So, whilst he was setting up the border, Vera, Melody, Taleon, and Rico talked over the plan, ensured that everyone knew it in detail, so that there were no slip-ups or mistakes. After returning, he immediately asked Vera to go on the hunt for supplies. He said that the sooner that we get them, the less risky it'll be. So, he gave her as much money as he could that would be good here in the human world with dealing with mages, and told her to buy all of the supplies that he possibly could. Vera was actually taken back by the new supplies that he added to the list, which was a strange and unorthodox list. Things that she never quite expected him to ask for. But for whatever reason, Salus suggested that they were of the utmost importance. Regardless of how strange they were, she was to get them. They would prove exceptionally valuable. Before Vera left, he actually got the same mixture of ingredients that he did to perform Talion's basic magical test to determine what magical area that he fell into. Except this time, Rico was the one who got to take the test. For whatever reason, Salus was pleasantly surprised to find out that Rico fell into the creation magic section, and that her magical affinity was life magic. So she was a life magic creationist. For whatever reason, Salus was overjoyed with this, suggesting that it couldn't have been a more perfect lineup, and would fit both Rico and Talion's training perfectly. After which, Vera left on a goods hunt. Salus told her not to come back until she had juiced every supplier that she possibly could, because further down the line it might be more difficult. With demons starting to flood into the world, even mages might start putting up walls, preparing for the worst. And people in the magical world weren't stupid. With a rise of demon activity of high levels, they would most likely be out and about themselves. So, very soon, it's possible that all of the supplies might start getting bought out by mages preparing to protect themselves in droves. But after Vera left, Salus instructed Taleon and Rico to get a good night's sleep. They had already stayed up too late. He needed them to be at least moderately rested for tomorrow's training. Taleon and Rico, of course, agreed to do this, and were fairly tired, to say the least. Taleon was still worried, uncertain as to the safety of his family and his new friends. So, even after going to his room, did have a great deal of trouble actually getting to sleep. The thoughts rolling around in his head kept him from finding peaceful rest, as the uneasy feeling of the possibility of something happening to his mother or Rico, or his grandmother, or even Silas for that matter, bothered him heavily. He had only just gained so much, so many new people in his life, and now they were all at risk, including his mother, who he loved the most out of all of them. And though he knew that truly it wasn't his fault, he still couldn't help but blame himself somewhat, as all of this trouble was circulating him. If he just weren't the son of some royal family, then his mother would be safe, his friends would be safe. But despite the thoughts that continued to trouble him, Taleon eventually found himself asleep. He was awoken the next morning by Silas knocking on his door, and with no ado whatsoever, immediately told him that they were going for training. As he exited his room, he found that Rico was already up for the day, as was his grandmother, who frankly looked exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes, as if she had been up all night. She in fact barely looked awake at all, trying her best to eat the food that her mother had prepared. Melody set out food for everyone, including Taleon, who had to eat it in a very big rush, as Salus didn't want to waste any time. Rico, of course, didn't eat, at least not any normal amount of food. She was hungry for only one thing, and Taleon happily obliged her, allowing her to get her fill, after which they headed out for training, this time with Melody and Vera following close and behind them. The walk to the training grounds was, well, exceptionally somber, and carried heavy tones of intensity. Everyone there seemed to be on edge, except Rico, who seemed just as go-lucky as usual, smiling and skipping along. Taleon actually envied her that ability to just be happy. He guesses that Rico has had a hard life up to this point. There may be trouble in the woods ahead of them, but for the moment they were safe. And for Rico, that was more than she usually had. So she was pleasantly happy, content with the time. Rico seemed to be like that, simply in the moment, not worrying about what's ahead or what was behind, simply experiencing every moment as its own individual joy. But finally, they reached the training ground. Vera and Melody were instructed to keep their distance at the edge of the training ground, where Vera quickly laid down some blanketing that she had brought along with her, and began to lay down. She apparently needed sleep very badly. and so took no time at all to get right to it.